Morning, everybody. Hello to everybody who's joining us in person, and thank you to everybody who's joining us virtually as well. My name's Kieran. I'm the Chief Executive of the Impact Investing Institute. We're a non-profit that was set up by the UK government, and what we do is we connect capital to impact. We act as a bridge between new economic ideas and the mainstream of capital markets. So Next Frontiers, it's about the ideas of tomorrow. The challenge, or the urgent opportunity, is how we embed those ideas today. And that's what our panel is going to focus on. How do we connect mainstream capital to the frontiers of impact? And before we get going, I'd like to start with a very quick bit of audience participation, just to check that everybody's had their coffee and they're awake. Just hands up. Who's feeling glass half full at the moment? Okay. Who's feeling glass half empty? Who's not sure there is a glass? Okay. Who has an idea that they think is part of the solution? Who thinks they know how to make... Keep your hand up if you've got an idea that's part of the solution. Who thinks they know how to make it a reality? Who thinks that they can make it a reality at the scale and speed required? Okay. Quite a lot of hands dropped down at that last point. What that says to me is that we need to use every lever we can to accelerate the transition that we need. And the belief that we have at the Impact Investing Institute is that capital markets have to be part of the solution. Their greatest purpose is to enable ambition and innovation. Capital markets are also huge. So just to put it in context, if you were to add up all of the charitable money, all the philanthropic money in the UK, that makes less than 1% of the money that's managed in this city alone. So they've really got to be part of the answer. And that scale can either support a transition to a fairer and regenerative future, or it can slow it down, or even stop it. The hypothesis that we're going to be exploring in today's panel is whether place-based impact investing, so that's investing in places with intentionality for people and the planet, is a pathway to drawing on those resources and unlocking economic realities that serve people better. So we're going to be exploring the opportunities and challenges this presents and the lessons that we can learn from those who are already actively doing it. Couldn't imagine a better panel than the one that we have today. We've got 40 minutes or so to get into discussion, and I'll ask the panelists to say a bit more about their backgrounds as they start answering the questions. But if I can briefly introduce them to you, we have Sheridan. Sheridan, to my left, is the Chief Executive for the Coventry and Warwickshire Reinvestment Trust, a not-for-profit specialist finance and business support provider committed to investing in businesses and individuals based in Coventry and Warwickshire. We have Carolyn. Carolyn is Head of Culture and Tourism at Southampton City Council, working on place-based collaborations with communities, businesses, anchor institutions and investors to galvanise regenerative, inclusive change across a city that has significant inequality and environmental challenges. Rupert is the Investment Director at Future Planet Capital. They're an impact-led global venture capital firm built to invest in high-growth potential companies from the world's top research centres. And finally, we have Dr. Frederick Weisenborn. Frederick is the Design Council's lead on placemaking and how place connects to economic regeneration and social innovation. At the Design Council, Frederick works with public and private sector clients and communities to envision and deliver better places. Cool. Well, let's get into things. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists in turn a framing question to get into the discussion, and I'd really love for you to ground it in very practical examples and realities, if you may. So, Sheridan, I'll start with you. So, I guess in a very practical way, why is investment in place important? And can you tell us about the important role your organisation plays in supporting small businesses in underserved communities, perhaps those businesses that mainstream banking has left behind?
Yes, so there's so many examples to sort of pull upon, but I'll just explain a little bit more about CWRT, because we're not just a one-trick hit provider pony. There's a lot more to what we do and how we do it and why we do it. So first off, we offer pre-start business support to individuals that want to explore starting up their own businesses. So we've gone into the marketplace to try and design a package of support that helps those that are from disadvantaged communities, that have been long-term unemployed, and those that are just seeking additional ways to get some finances. So we help them to explore if starting up a business is for them, but crucially giving them the tools, the knowledge, the resources, and practical steps about how to go about it. And then the sort of second part of what we do in terms of business support is that we've designed our own program that supports women in businesses. So giving them the financial education, the financial power, and a bit of financial savvy as to how to take their businesses to the next level and really give them the confidence to put their plans into action and use finance as a tool to drive that innovation and productivity. And then going on to our sort of financial products, I like to sort of split them into three categories. So the first one, that we focus on micro businesses, we focus on startup businesses, to really help them get that seed investment to take their businesses, to basically start up their own businesses. But they just lack the credit history, they lack the security, they lack the actual track record to go down the mainstream provision and actually start up their businesses. And then we've got our sort of second tier access to finance, which is more about commercial products. So that's just to help businesses, whether it's working capital, whether they want to invest in capital expenditure, but just to sort of keep their businesses ticking over. And then our third product is really focusing on the high growth businesses. So that's providing them with a loan to go out and buy capital expenditure. But then once they've bought that capital expenditure, they get up to 40% grant back that they can use for whatever purposes they want. They can use that for cash flow purposes, cover the interest of their loans. So we really try and make sure that our products are flexible and adaptable to the local business needs. And then to sort of round that all off is that we are just in the process of setting up our own financial academy. So that's to make sure that customers of our own, but also just the general public, are able to access support and that educational piece about what finance actually is and how they can use that to grow their businesses, but also to manage their own money personally. And we think as a responsible finance provider, that is our role that we play, to make sure that we give that educational piece to local residents and businesses.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sheridan. Carolyn, so I guess what we're doing here is we're exploring if or how capital can accelerate place-led futures. But very practically, what are some of the complexities for places? Take Southampton as an example. What are some of the complexities in attracting private finance that understands the vision that Southampton may have for a regenerative future?
Thank you. Hear me okay? Sorry. Yes. So in my role as Head of Culture and Tourism within the Council, I sit within the Place Directorate that includes places like planning, infrastructure, transport. What is different for us, that culture and tourism is part of that, and the connection to our communities is really important to that. Some of you may be aware that we were part of that UK City of Culture competition. I don't say we didn't win. We say we won a lot from that process, and we are a silver city. And what was really fundamental to us was understanding our city much more powerfully than we ever did before we started that. And that's the complexity of need and the opportunity. So one of the challenges Southampton has, and other places will have this too, is the perception of what it is. So the perception of Southampton within leafy Hampshire, that it's wealthy, there is no need. Therefore, in terms of attracting impact investors, it's assumed it's fine. But we have a city where you cross the river and people's life expectancy is 10 years less. We have really high levels of health need around, and the contrast between the more wealthy and the more deprived communities is significant. 2.5 times greater in terms of respiratory illnesses. Mental health is really poor for some of our communities that can be nearly 3 times higher. And again, these are about social divides. I think the other thing just also to sort of touch on is an assumption about what place means. We tend to think about place in terms of geography and location. But as a social historian, for me, it is about history, heritage, emotion, connection, and what that could look like and what you draw upon from those places to make the changes that our communities want. So we need to be really careful in some of our assumptions. And actually, we did that through our UK City of Culture journey, and we are building upon it. By contrast, we also have a reasonable economy, 7.2 billion it's worth. We have a port that is one of the most successful in Europe. I forget the figures, 40 billion of exports nationally that goes out. We also attract over 2 million cruise passengers, and that is a challenge in environmental terms, what that means for our city. We are also, parts of our city will be underwater soon. We are on that tipping point. And no kidding, it will affect the most deprived communities. So we have to do something about that now, and we are. But we also have a really strong marine and maritime industry that has innovated over many years. So there's a lot of technology and innovation that has happened in the city. And we have 2 world-class universities that have led global research. And we have the National Oceanography Centre, I can never say that word, that leads work around oceans and climate economy across the world. So really, really powerful. So in terms of why has that been hard in terms of understanding? Because we haven't really understood it, and we have been very poor at communicating and articulating our narrative and that need. So if we don't know what we stand for, how does anyone else? So also I would also articulate in terms of leadership, consistency of leadership, and also getting lots of other people involved in that leadership, not the usual suspects. But that has changed since our City of Culture journey, and we are clearer, becoming more confident and becoming more bold about that. And I think the dimension to that is, previously when we've had investors or developers saying, we want to do this, they've said, yeah, we've said, okay, fine. But actually, it wasn't good for us. So we need to work together to find the right solutions for our place, and that will be applicable to everyone. So I'll go back to the beginning. Context is really, really important.
A theme across both of your points, I think, is about power and where it sits in this relationship as well between capital markets and places and individuals and communities within those places. I might move to Rupert. So Rupert, you've had a long career investing in impact-led businesses in the Midlands, across the UK. Just very practically, what are some of the barriers you've seen to those businesses being spotted, being invested in, being successful? As you said, every big business is a small business once.
How long have we got?
Got about 4 minutes.
Not 45 then.
Sadly.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rupert. For those of you who were expecting a posh English accent, I am the only Glaswegian on the planet called Rupert. I'm currently an investment director at Future Planet Capital, which is an impact-based investor. I also am fund principal of the Mayor of the West Midlands' new £25 million co-investment fund, and that is very, very focused on place. But before we get to that, a lot of you put your hand down when asked how confident you were about scaling. One of my favourite sayings is from Walt Disney, who said, if you can dream it, you can do it. Don't forget, this was started by a mouse. So never give up. And my other favourite saying is Thomas Edison's, who said, a vision without execution is hallucination. So focus on the execution, because they are absolutely key. Anyway, I'm an investment director at Future Planet Capital. I've got the challenge of investing a fund in the West Midlands. The big challenge in the UK is outside the Golden Triangle. There's a dearth of capital. And why is that important? Well, not only are the businesses starved of capital, but the ecosystem is starved of capital as well. And it becomes self-fulfilling. There's nobody in the ecosystem supporting these businesses to become investment ready, and if they're not investment ready, they'll never raise capital, and it'll go backwards. Believe it or not, at the end of 2022, the Ukraine still had 52 venture capital companies, even mid-invasion. The West Midlands has got to same size of economy, same size as economy as Ukraine was pre-invasion. So, that's some of the challenges we've got from a regional basis. So the key for me is to get the ecosystem spinning in a flywheel, everyone working together, collaboration rather than silos. And if you can achieve that, then you can achieve great things. And as far as impact goes, what is the definition of impact? We were talking about it earlier. We've got an investment opportunity which is in the dentures market, and solving the issues in that market has huge impact on about 1.4 million people in the UK. We've got another business which addresses the issue of baldness in black women with afro hair. That's a global issue. They reckon somewhere in the region of 10 million people around the world suffer from that affliction. So you can have huge impacts locally, but we need to get the ecosystem working together. It's not just about money. It's just not about capital. It's about creating an environment which supports the really interesting entrepreneurs that we've got, and help them hit the ball out of the park, because too many fail. I've been in this industry for 35 years. I've got two titles at the moment. I'm a failed entrepreneur. I started a business which became the #1 ranked restaurant in both Edinburgh and Birmingham. COVID came along, price rises came along, train strikes came along, and then finally, the one thing that got us, and this is another lesson for everybody out there who's an entrepreneur, spend all your time aligning your stakeholders, because we had one landlord who wasn't aligned, and that was the end of the business, despite everything else we'd achieved. So focus on aligning your stakeholders. If you can do that, you'll have a tribe of people that will go on a journey with you. As soon as you've got one out of the line, it makes life much more difficult.
Thank you, Rupert. You're taking us towards ecosystems, and Frederick, that's probably an excellent point to bring you in, and perhaps some models that you can share to frame our thinking that the Design Council have been developing around the design value framework, and how it identifies and assesses the wider social, environmental and democratic impacts of work, particularly place-focused work. So I wondered if you could just kind of expand on that, and perhaps a practical example of what that looks like in place.
Sure. Before I get started, I just want to say it's a great pleasure to be here. And it's a great pleasure to see so many people in the audience. So hopefully we can, give you some food for thought today. I'm here on behalf of the Design Council. We're a charity. We represent the design sector in the UK. And as part of that work, we took forward a piece of research a couple of years ago, together with partners in BOP Consulting and the University of the Arts London, which really mapped the types of value that design realizes across the UK economy. So in terms of the methodology we applied, it was sort of a deliberative or consultative approach. So we spoke to stakeholders from across the sector to try and understand how they realize value through the production and commissioning of design. So that's kind of the background. This was launched, I think 2 years ago. It's called the Design Values Framework. It's a tool that's available to everyone, so you can go and find it on our website if you're interested. I suppose it has two dimensions. It has a first dimension, which relates to the 4 values that you mentioned just now, and I'll come back to those. And then it has another dimension which relates to the life cycle of the design. So thinking about the life cycle of the design from concept design stage through production or construction, if we're talking about the built environment, and then distribution, consumption, and also what happens at the decommissioning stage, so is there a way to kind of feed some of the materials back into the kind of production process. But in terms of the 4 values that you asked me about, the 4 values that we mapped during the research process related to financial value, to planetary value, and this one is particularly relevant for us at the Design Council because we have a mission, which is to design for planet. And then we also have social value and democratic value. So we separate out democratic value from social value, which I think is an innovation. You've probably heard of kind of the triple bottom line. Well, this is a quadruple bottom line, as it were. Now, I think it's quite instructive to think about those values in relation to place. So how can we see these types of value realized across places, right? So financial value, we know. There is clearly financial value to be realized by private developers, but also by local government in developing property. I think the challenge is to make sure that those values flow to all members of the community and don't accrue to just a few, whether private or public individuals. There's then the planetary value, so thinking about how we can structure our towns, our cities, to adapt to climate change, but also to reduce the impact of climate change. Those would be kind of planetary types of value, and you might find them in regenerative practices, in regards to carbon emission reductions, biodiversity net gain, and so on. You then have social values, and the way that they play out in places, I think, is to do with supporting communities in terms of their health and well-being. COVID was a really good reminder of how places kind of become a prism through which other processes become reflected and refracted.
Yep.
So that's an important one. And then finally, on the democratic value, we know that there are certain communities that don't have the representation that other communities have. And so in terms of places, the ambition to realize democratic value is, well, one manifestation of that is to provide those communities with places to kind of to be seen, to be heard, to be represented. That can be anything from like recording studios for young up-and-coming artists. It can be theater stages. It can be public realm where you provide small urban design interventions that enable those communities that live around that public space to congregate and to have convivial exchanges. So these are some examples of how that plays out. We can probably come back to some more concrete examples later.
Thank you. And if anybody in the audience is from capital markets or a capital allocator, I think that's a really important framework to think about. The financial, the planetary, I think those are increasingly thought about. The social, probably less so. The democratic, is it really thought about? I don't know. Let's move into a bit more let's get a discussion going. So one of the themes that I think has been coming out of all of your points about the importance of collaboration. Everybody always talks. Everybody sits on a stage and talks about the importance of collaboration. But what does it practically look like in this context? So in the context of how capital can support places and can support regeneration and more inclusive futures. What's different about this than things you've seen before? And whoever would like to go first.
I'm happy to go.
Thanks, Caroline.
I guess for us, the difference is the early opportunity and the early intervention.
Okay.
That's about how we can work together to make those changes, because rather than us having already thought we found solutions, we want to bring on board all the different capabilities and opportunities and a different way of thinking, because there is a challenge when you're in a place and places that you might just have one model and might just look a little bit beyond it but not more. But actually having social impact investors part of that conversation. And for us, obviously, having the Impact Investing Institute is a really good opportunity. That's the brokering. And I think part of the characteristic of that is also being open, being vulnerable, and allowing others to be part of that. It's really, really important. So actually what you've got is an empathetic journey that's done with communities and the stakeholders in those places, and it takes account that spiritual as well as other dimensions of places that feeds in, so you get that marrying, and I think that's really, really important in terms of that collaboration. And recognising none of us have the answer. There is no single answer. So drawing upon that is really important for us.
Rupert, does that resonate?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's nothing more important than collaboration, to be honest. And you know, be it the West Midlands or Southampton or the UK or the globe, we need to collaborate to ensure that we save the planet. And you know, the best example of that, if you Google what makes Silicon Valley successful, originally it was all about collaboration. Silicon Valley was a fruit-growing region of Northern California in 1970, and today, if it was a country, it would be the second richest in the world. And it's all about collaboration, and it was a defensive mechanism led by Stanford, and they collaborated with the politicians and the financiers and the academics and the military, and Silicon Valley is now what it is. Now it's not perfect, and we should learn from that, but collaboration is absolutely fundamental, and it comes back to my aligning stakeholders point. If you don't have a vision, you won't align any stakeholders. And Silicon Valley had a vision. They had a political one. They had an economic one. And we need more of that. We need leaders with a vision.
But I think, you know, just to jump in terms of collaboration, it's also, we don't know the answers.
Yeah.
And if we can pull those resources together and actually do a bit more of knowledge exchange, knowledge sharing, so we can learn from each other and understand what the gaps are, where the needs are, and actually address those together, but pulling along our strengths. You know, not just all of us working in silo, but actually working to complement what is there, but also a chance to rip up the rule book. Is that the world has changed, business has changed, the needs have changed. Why not just rip it up and actually do something new, do something unique, and put of all of our experiences together and just do something different instead of reinventing the wheel again and again?
So what stops that?
I think ego.
Yeah.
And also, you know, UK SPF is completely different now to the ERDF funding, so competition
Do you
is
want to
getting...
explain for those people who don't know what those are?
Yes. The European Regional Development Fund, another great acronym, and then UK SPF, which is the Shared Prosperity Fund. There's a fraction of money out there to support these initiatives, and money is getting scarce, so we have to compete with each other instead of actually collaborating with each other and making our resources go further. It blows my mind why we don't, but...
If I can just build on that, I think if you're looking at local places, there is also a clear need to develop and nurture collaborative practices when it comes to place shaping. So I think in the design sector more broadly, we've seen a shift from consultation towards co-creation, right? And I think nowhere is that more important than when it comes to places, because these are literally the places where we live, right? And so we now see a much greater emphasis on convening and co-creating with communities when it comes to the more kind of future-oriented place visions that are needed now that our high streets, our town centres are changing due to other economic and international pressures.
Yeah. Okay, so let's say we can do that. Let's say in a rapidly changing world, we can do the alignment of all stakeholders. We can do it with sufficient thought to financial, social, planetary, democratic value. We can get rid of the egos. How do we know if it's making a difference? Like, what do you practically look for in your work to know that it's working?
I don't think you do know it makes a difference. You know, Elon Musk walks into a venture capital company and says, I want to raise money for a business whose mission is to colonize Mars. It's never going to happen. But it sets a journey, sets a North Star, and people can decide to go on that journey or they can decide not to go on that journey. But there's a vision there. But then you need to make it practical, you need to make it understandable, you need to make the first step easy, you need to make it easy to follow. And he said, oh, that's my long-term vision, and to get there it will require huge amounts of stuff, but unless I develop a rocket, I'm not going to get off the planet. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. So take it back to what we can do first, how we're going to achieve it, what capabilities we need, what capital we need, and you get stakeholders to buy in that way.
Okay, so for you, it's all about kind of the execution of the stakeholder buy-in. Frederick?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer to your question is if you want to find a way of kind of capturing the impact of your work, you should just download the values framework from the Design Council website, because it has lots of great examples of how you might do that. But I think what's interesting is, and this is kind of coming back to the point you were making just now about the mission to Mars. We obviously had the mission to put a person on the moon about 50 years ago. What was interesting about that particular mission, it was successful in the end, was all of the spillover effects that were created through that cross kind of sectoral drive to kind of realize that ambition. Those types of impact often don't get measured in the same way. These spillover effects, they often sort of fall between the cracks. Yeah. And I think there is a challenge for us to develop new forms of monitoring evaluation that can capture those. I will give just one example. So I'm originally from Copenhagen. There's a famous bridge in Copenhagen called Dronning Louise's Bridge, which serves a kind of infrastructural purpose. It kind of transports people from A to B. But about 10 years ago, traffic was redirected around that bridge, so you don't have heavy traffic going down it anymore. And it's now become a place where most Copenhageners congregate after work. They meet their friends. It's become a different type of infrastructure that creates value for that community. And that is a type of spillover effect that becomes really interesting to try and conceptualize and also measure once you talk about places, because places are so intricately structured that if you change one thing, you can realize new types of value, and it's about capturing those types of impacts.
I'm going to keep us moving on because we're getting tight on time. So I guess the purpose of this conference as well is about how can we take more progressive, more radical ideas that push the envelope of practice, and how do we bring them towards the mainstream, or bring the mainstream towards those ideas in a way that will be successful? So what are you seeing, what are you feeling, what are you hearing that you think we should know about?
I guess I can't talk about other places. I think that's important, is don't make assumptions about other places. Yeah. But the thing is, for me, is key is mindset, is that willingness and desire and that genuine collaboration that actually is aligning to some of those social and environmental goals, not just financial. It's part of the mix. And I agree with Frederick around the democracy element. That's really important. Obviously, local elections recently and people having to register for ID, a lot of people lost out on that democratic opportunity, and that's not good for society. So I think the radical is taking mindset and people and being willing to take those risks and embracing failure, actually. Yeah. But equally, going back to Sheridan's point about sharing that information and being really, really well connected. Yeah. But you need fantastic leadership at all levels, not just the usual suspects because of their roles. Yeah. It has to be so much more than that. And bring in people from your whole constituencies and across borders. Forget about borders. Think about spaces and places and change and what you want to see and what you dream for.
I was at this conference last year, and it strikes a chord that what feels radical really isn't, right? So I guess there's something about why does it feel so radical to do things that sounds like the risk of not doing those things is much bigger than the risk of doing them.
I think from my perspective that's key. You know, I bet that most of the solutions to most of the challenges of the world are thought about daily, and it's about doing it. It goes back to the Walt Disney comment. And the other thing is if you do decide to do it, you know, make it less easy to fail, because too many fantastic ideas fail, and it's about the execution. So it's about putting a much better wrapper around our entrepreneurs than we've got in the UK at the moment. I describe it like a hospital without any doctors or nurses if you're an entrepreneur. It's so lonely.
Well, it sounds like we've got a few of those at the moment as well.
Yeah, well, yeah. or a school without teachers.
Yeah, that too.
You basically got to teach yourself, and that's wrong. That's just setting people up for failure. And if we stop less people failing, and help them more, provide a more collaborative ecosystem, that's 3/4 of the problem solved just there. And then the capital is there to grease the wheels. It's not about capital, it's about smart money, it's about helping these great ideas, you know, not struggle.
Sure.
But I suppose just to sort of wrap that up, it's also to make sure that there's a stepping stone approach to it. Is that it's fantastic that there's equity, there's investment being plummeted into that for the high growth businesses. There's also money being plummeted into startup businesses. But how do you get the startup businesses to being the high growth businesses? It's just you pump money into them and then leave people hanging high and dry. With that stepping stone approach, bringing in collaboration, bringing in that wraparound service to guide these businesses and actually funnel them through to these high growth positions,
Well,
they just left.
Yeah, sorry, this hospital without any doctors or nurses actually is staffed by high-paid consultants who wander around cherry-picking the potentially most easily curable and most profitable patients, and that's wrong as well.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Frederick, the Design Council works across sectors and spaces. Are you seeing ideas in different areas that you think could be relevant to this conversation?
Yeah, I think there is a model, so that was your original question, that, you know, what are some models that could perhaps be scaled up? Which I think is kind of known as the Preston model. It's community wealth building. It's thinking about how, this is coming back to place, how you can map the assets that you have in a local economy, including anchor institutions, how you can mobilize those, how you can use that as a jumping off point to nurture a local economy, which is also an ecology of different types of offers. And there are lots of examples of where that's been done. Actually, up in Enfield, the Meridian Water Development, which has some other issues at the moment, they've developed a brilliant anchor institution called Blocks, which is an open access factory where local people can come in and produce different types of outputs. But I won't go too much into that. What I will say is that I think where we're heading now is towards a world with shortening supply chains, towards a world where we'll experience a certain degree of deglobalization. As the other side of that coin, there will be a reindustrialization of some of our local economies. And it's about thinking about how can we facilitate that? How can we use that as a lever for creating new jobs, for developing skills locally, so that we can bring back prosperous places across the UK.
Thank you. So I guess we've heard that it's not really about the capital. It's about the ecosystems, the ecologies, the collaboration, the leadership. So as we draw this panel to a close, a rapid fire question, and Frederick, I'll start with you and kind of work down this way. What would you hope would be different in 12 months' time?
So I'd like to see a much greater focus on how we can develop regenerative places across the UK, regenerative neighbourhoods. We recently at the Design Council put in a speculative bid with Innovate UK for a kind of a moonshot mission, which is probably why that moonshot kind of idea was on my mind. And we said we want every neighbourhood across the UK to be a regenerative neighbourhood by 2035. I think that's the type of ambition that we should have in the UK right now. And I'd like to see some steps being made towards that in the next 12 months.
Great, thanks, Frederick. Rupert?
Yeah, with so very focused on the West Midlands, which is where I'm based. In 12 months, I'd like it to have a world-class accelerator at the top of an escalator of accelerators, which invests in half a dozen seriously world-class businesses out of the West Midlands on an annual basis, and to make sure that all the ecosystem is completely aligned to be driving those businesses towards that goal.
Thank you. Caroline?
So I got two. One is around some of the specific projects we're working around in terms of regeneration, particularly around creative industries and culture, because of the change we want to deliver in the city and learn from that for future projects and having those teed up. The other bit is the analogy I first heard when I arrived into the city, which was in the morning, the white vans leave the city and the Mercedes come in. I want the white vans to be able to stay in the city and have quality jobs and quality living and quality experience, that they're not having to go elsewhere, that they are genuinely part of the city and making that a wealthy and more distributed place.
Thank you.
I've got two as well. First one is collaborations between finance providers, government policymakers, brokers, just so we can sort of join up that ecosystem and be harmonious and sing Kumbaya together, but really make, real impact. And then the second one is to see a real expansion of the community development finance institutions, so we can really put our work to action and scale up and expand that capacity of what we do and how we do it.
Absolutely vital. Well, thank you. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to Joseph Rowntree Foundation and all the partners who put on today. At the Impact Investing Institute, we're doing a lot of work on place-based impact investing. So if you're interested, if you'd like to collaborate with us, you've got some ideas you'd like to share, do please be in touch, and we'd love to hear from you. But if you could join me in thanking our panelists in the usual way.